Ethan adjusted the straps of his old leather satchel as he trudged through the wheat fields. The golden stalks waved lazily in the afternoon breeze, but his mind was far from the peaceful scene. A royal messenger had arrived at his village that morning, summoning him to the castle, a summons no one in the kingdom could refuse. As Ethan approached the grand gates of the castle, his heart pounded. He'd never been this close to the royal palace, let alone inside. The towering walls loomed overhead, casting long shadows across the cobblestone path. The guards, clad in gleaming armor, eyed him with curiosity but stepped aside to let him pass. Inside, the grandeur of the castle left him breathless. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and intricately woven tapestries adorned the vast halls. Ethan of the Meadows, a deep voice echoed as he entered the throne room. Seated on a gilded throne was King Alden, his presence commanding yet shrouded in an air of weariness. Ethan dropped to one knee, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty." "Rise," the king said, his tone measured. "You must be wondering why you've been summoned." Ethan nodded, unsure if speaking out of turn would offend the monarch. The king leaned forward. "A sacred relic, an amulet with the power to safeguard this kingdom, has been stolen. My most trusted knights have failed to recover it. But I have reason to believe you, an outsider, unburdened by courtly ties, are the key to bringing it back." Ethan's eyes widened. Him? A simple farmhand tasked with such a monumental mission? "You will be rewarded handsomely," the king continued. "Gold, land, and the gratitude of your kingdom. But if you refuse..." His voice trailed off, the implied consequences hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Swallowing hard, Ethan nodded. "I'll do it, Your Majesty." "Good," the king said, a faint smile curling his lips. "You leave at first light. May fortune favor you." As Ethan left the throne room, the weight of the mission pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had no idea where to begin, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same. The morning sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the castle walls as Ethan tightened the straps on his satchel. A guard handed him a rolled map, a few provisions, and a stern warning: trust no one. Ethan's first steps beyond the castle gates felt surreal. The path stretched before him, winding through open meadows and dense woodlands. The fresh scent of morning dew was a stark contrast to the tension brewing in his mind. Where does one even begin to find a stolen relic? Ethan muttered, scanning the map for clues. As the day wore on, his solitude was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path behind him. Turning swiftly, he saw a cloaked figure approaching. "Lost, are we?" the man said, his voice calm yet laced with intrigue. Ethan instinctively reached for the small dagger at his belt. "Who's asking?" The man chuckled, pulling back his hood to reveal a weathered face and sharp, calculating eyes. "The name's Rowan, a fellow traveler, and perhaps your best chance at surviving this little quest of yours." Ethan hesitated. "How do you know about my quest?" Rowan smirked. "Word travels fast in a kingdom like ours, especially when the king himself is involved. Besides, you're not exactly blending in with that shiny map and your wide-eyed stare." Unconvinced but desperate for guidance, Ethan allowed Rowan to walk alongside him. The two traded cautious conversation, with Rowan pointing out landmarks and teaching him survival tips. "You'll need to learn quickly if you're serious about this mission," Rowan said, as they paused by a stream to fill their canteens. "Out here, the only rule is to stay alive." Ethan frowned, unsure if he could trust this stranger. Yet, Rowan's knowledge of the terrain and his sharp instincts were undeniable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the duo set up camp beneath an ancient oak tree. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Rowan knew more than he let on. But for now, He had little choice but to follow his enigmatic companion. That night, as the fire crackled and the forest whispered its secrets, Ethan's resolve hardened. He had taken the first step into a world far larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The dense forest seemed alive, its towering trees stretching endlessly into the sky. Shadows danced across the undergrowth as Ethan and Rowan moved cautiously along the overgrown path. "We're being followed," Rowan murmured, his voice low but firm. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What? By who?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for Ethan to step off the path, pulling him behind a cluster of bushes. Moments later, the faint sound of laughter and muffled voices reached their ears. Peeking through the foliage, Ethan spotted a group of ragged men, their faces hardened by years of desperation. Bandits. They carried crude weapons and moved with an air of confidence, as if they owned the forest. "They'll strip us of everything if they catch us," Rowan whispered. "We need a plan." Ethan's mind raced. "What if we sneak past them?" Rowan shook his head. "Not with how loud you are. Trust me, they'd hear us a mile away." The bandits were drawing closer. Ethan's palms grew clammy as he tried to steady his breathing. Rowan leaned in, his voice barely audible. "Follow my lead." Before Ethan could protest, Rowan grabbed a small rock and hurled it toward a cluster of trees opposite their hiding spot. The sharp crack of the impact drew the bandits' attention instantly. "Over there!" One of them barked, and the group rushed toward the sound. "Now!" Rowan hissed, pulling Ethan to his feet. The two darted through the forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of leaves underfoot. Ethan's heart pounded as they weaved between trees, the bandits' shouts fading into the distance. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, Ethan glared at Rowan. "You could have warned me." Rowan grinned, unbothered by the close call. "Consider it your first lesson. Always expect the unexpected." Ethan couldn't decide if he was angry or impressed. "Is it always going to be like this?" "Probably worse," Rowan said with a shrug. As they resumed their journey, Ethan felt a mix of frustration and determination. He might be out of his depth, but he was starting to understand one thing. This mission was going to test him in ways he never imagined. The forest eventually gave way to rocky terrain, and the air grew colder as they climbed higher. By the time they reached the entrance of the cave, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. "This is it," Rowan said, gesturing to the dark opening in the mountainside. Ethan hesitated, peering into the shadows. "Are you sure the amulet is here?" Rowan nodded. "I've followed enough rumors to know this is the place." The cave was eerily quiet, the only sounds their cautious footsteps and the occasional drip of water echoing off the walls. Ethan gripped the small lantern Rowan had given him, its flickering light casting long shadows on the jagged stone. As they ventured deeper, they came upon an ancient altar carved into the rock. Resting atop it was a small, ornate chest. "There it is," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with a mix of awe and relief. But Rowan didn't move toward the chest. Instead, he folded his arms and leaned against a nearby wall. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, glancing back at him. Rowan's expression darkened. "Before you grab it, you should know something. That amulet isn't what the king says it is." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Rowan stepped closer, his voice steady and deliberate. "The amulet doesn't protect the kingdom. It enhances the power of whoever wields it. The king doesn't want it to save his people. He wants it to consolidate his rule, to make himself unstoppable." Ethan felt the weight of Rowan's words settle over him like a heavy cloak. "How do you know that?" "I've seen what power like that can do," Rowan said, his tone grim. "It corrupts. The king sent you because you're disposable. If you bring it back, you'll seal the fate of this kingdom, And not in the way you think. Ethan's gaze shifted back to the chest. His mind raced. Could Rowan be lying? But why would he? Everything about this journey suddenly felt like a lie. A web of deception spun by the very man who claimed to protect the kingdom. What do I do? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That's your choice, Rowan said, stepping aside. But whatever you decide, be ready to face the consequences. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he reached for the chest. The truth had changed everything, but one thing remained clear. He couldn't go back now. Ethan's fingers hovered over the chest's lid, his heart racing as Rowan's words echoed in his mind. The air inside the cave seemed heavier now, pressing down on him like the weight of the decision he had to make. With a sharp inhale, he opened the chest. The amulet inside shimmered faintly, its intricate design catching the lantern's light. It was beautiful, too beautiful to be something so dangerous. Are you sure you want to take it? Rowan asked, his voice steady but filled with warning. Ethan hesitated. What if destroying it makes things worse? What if the king was telling the truth? Rowan's gaze was piercing. And what if he wasn't? Sometimes, doing what's right means taking a risk. Ethan swallowed hard, gripping the amulet. A sudden warmth spread through his hand, and for a moment, he felt a surge of power, like he could do anything, be anyone. But the sensation terrified him more than it thrilled him. No one should have this kind of power, Ethan murmured, his voice firm. Before Rowan could respond, Ethan raised the amulet and smashed it against the edge of the altar. The sound of shattering metal echoed through the cave, followed by a burst of light that sent both men stumbling backward. When the light faded, the amulet was gone, reduced to a pile of glittering dust. Ethan's chest heaved as he stared at the remnants of the object that had nearly consumed him. You did it, Rowan said, a hint of admiration in his tone. Ethan nodded, though his relief was tinged with unease. What now? The king will want answers, Rowan smirked. You tell him the truth if you dare, or you walk away and start a new life, free from his grasp. The journey back to the castle felt shorter, yet far more daunting. When Ethan finally stood before the king, his resolve was unshakable. Where is the amulet? The king demanded, his eyes narrowing. It's gone, Ethan said, meeting the monarch's gaze. Destroyed. The king's face darkened, but Ethan didn't flinch. It was too dangerous, Your Majesty. No one should wield that kind of power, not even you. For a moment, the throne room was silent. Then, with a wave of his hand, the king dismissed Ethan, his expression unreadable. As Ethan walked away from the castle, he felt lighter than he had in days. He had made his choice, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing: he had stayed true to himself. The forest welcomed him back, its shadows no longer threatening but familiar. Rowan was waiting by the path, his arms crossed. Ready for the next adventure? Rowan asked, a sly grin on his face. Ethan smiled. Always. Together they disappeared into the trees, leaving the weight of the kingdom behind.